That'd be fine. She says she'll get you when she gets back.
We make a list. Does we need to make a list? Yeah.
History is made up of two parts. Part number one is an item that you can see, an item that you can pick up. This right here, you can see it. You can pick it up. You can read it. You can touch it, right? Another part of history is hand-me-down stories, those that my grandpa told me. And those stories, some are true, some are not true, some are partially true, and little fiction been added to it. Those are just as important as these right here. Now, this doesn't look like history, does it? We had two ships run together around here, and we went to federal court. This was introduced in federal court for the simple reason is they have to show that I was what they called an expert, and I have not figured that out yet. To start out with the program now, I'd like to welcome you to the most historical thing or place in the state of Texas. This Lynchburg Ferry has been in operations. It will be 175 years old in 1997. So we have seen presidents come and go. We have seen historians come and go. We've seen countries come and go. Because in 1822, when Nathaniel Lynch put this ferry in, then in 1836, Texas became a nation of its own. And then in 1845, am I right? They joined the Union. 9 years after they become a nation of its own. So this ferry has seen even nations come and go. It's the oldest continuing service of any kind anywhere in the state of Texas. So we're real proud of it, that one fact. Another historical fact about the Lynchburg Ferry, who was the very first president of the Republic of Texas? Benjamin Franklin. Who said that? Did you say it, Benjamin Franklin?
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry.
You
I was vice president.
No. David G. Burnett. David G. Burnett was elected by delegates. He was not elected by the people of the state of Texas, but by delegates. And I don't know how the delegates were elected or appointed. Maybe they were like Napoleon. They just took office, on their own. But he was the very first president. He was called the ad interim. They added a new government. Interim means temporary. He came here in the 1830s, and he bought property from Nathaniel Lynch. And he lived right up here. You've been to his home site?
With part of the property.
Okay.
We will just skirt by with the other.
With part of it? You got a good part and a bad part? Good part against the
we have some that wanted to come one day and some that wanted to come 2 days, and so
okay.
Some of them have been out there for kind of a talk. I talked to them about it at site.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to have to make one of your tours here one day, full tour.
I'll have to work on my history, make sure I'm right.
And the vice president, it wasn't Benjamin Franklin now. It was who? De Zavala. Lorenzo de Zavala was probably the most historical person in the history of Texas. The only man to be put in prison, political prison, and during his time in prison, he studied and he became a medical doctor. He's the only man in history to sign 2 declarations of independence. He signed one of them from Mexico whenever they broke away from Turkey, and then he signed... Ma'am?
Who?
De Zavala?
No, from Turkey.
Oh, from Turkey?
Yeah.
Who said that? I didn't. Whenever Mexico broke away from Spain in 1824, and then He signed it for Texas when Texas broke away from Mexico in 1836. So the only man to sign 2 Independence Declarations for a country. His home site was right across over here. There's a cement silo, and at the far end of it by the Highline Towers, there's a flagpole and a marker showing his home site, which was actually further out into the water when they widened the banks. Then they took it in, and they moved his graveyard from there over to the battlefield by the sundial. And Burnett and de Zavala both, they served for 4 months. Sam Houston was the first president elected by the people. And who was his vice president? Lamar. Mm-hmm. And Houston's home was down at the old Humble Docks down here in Baytown. I don't know where Lamar lived. Evidently somewhere close, didn't he?
I don't know.
That's a question. But, okay, so there's another couple of historical facts about the Lynchburg Ferry. The Lynchburg Ferry was part of the old Spanish Trail that led from Mexico down to Old Mexico, and they come up, and then they come across here and went to Louisiana in the United States. This ferry system here was one of the main parts to that trail. And it actually helped bring the battle to be fought over here. It played a big role in that. Santa Anna was heading this way for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, he wanted to capture the government. That's where the government was, right here. Reason number 2 was Sam Houston was heading this way. Santa Anna says Houston is going to cross that Lynch Ferry and go on into Mexico, and y'all can all, drop like Donna did there on the floor. Santa Anna says that Houston cannot whip him. His army is so much smaller, they're not quite as trained as his. They didn't have the equipment that he had. But Houston is running, trying to go to the United States and become safe, and he wouldn't have to worry about Houston and the Texas Army anymore, and he'd capture the government. Houston says, my men can fight one time, one battle with Santa Anna, and we might have a pretty good chance at it if we can surprise him, if we can get him into a corner where he can't run and we can't run. You have the marshlands to the east, you have the San Jacinto River to the north, you have Buffalo Bayou to the west side. That's a beautiful place to trap somebody. His army couldn't run, the Mexican army could not run. So this area here in the Lynchburg Ferry helped bring that battle down here. Before that battle was fought, a few days before, they had what they call the Great Escape. The people on that side of the river began to fear Santa Anna and his army because he would burn everything and destroy everything in his path when he was coming down. So they began to cross here. And it took up to 5 days to cross. Because they brought a lot of the livestock, the barnyard animals, and the household goods. There's in wagons and buggies and horseback and walking. And it took them up to 5 days to cross, and they estimated 4,000 people in line at one time to cross. Nathaniel Lynch overcharged these people. Man, he's seen a good thing going. And after then after the battle was fought, Texas won its independence. David G. Burnett got on his horse and he rode from the top of the hill down here, and he made Nathaniel give the money back. I'm sure he didn't give it all back. He gave some of it back. Now, the day before the battle, Sam Houston sent men down to move the ferries, take the ferries out of service and hide them. And recently I have learned that Houston had a couple of boats around Buffalo Bayou up there by the battleship of Texas. And it could have been the Lynchburg ferries that he had. I don't know of any other boats in this area that he could have gotten ahead over there. So the Lynchburg ferry did play a historical role there. And there's a lot of other historical things. For an example, the flag I was talking about, each community had their own guard unit, their own police department or militia. And, oh, I remember his name. Now I started asking, who was the commander of the Lynchburg Volunteers? That was the guard unit for Baytown, for LaPorte, Deer Park, Pasadena, Crosby, this entire area. They all banded together, and Lynchburg had the only post office in the area. They had the only general store in the area, so they all had to gather here. So they put together a group of men, and they called them the Lynchburg Volunteers. William Scott was the commander, Captain Scott. He sent a blue piece of material down to Frances Lynch, and she sewed a white star in the middle of a blue field, wrote the word independence under it. Whenever this guard unit would ride down through this area here, people would look and say, there goes the Lone Star Guard. So what do you think that Lone Star Guard became? What's the nickname of our state?
The Lone Star State.
Right, the Lone Star State. So the Lone Star State, the nickname came from here.
Is it about as a little bit more difficult at night than it is at daytime?
You mean to run the boat? Not really. Not really.
Do y'all have like running lights out here or something like that?
Yeah, we have running lights, deck lights, mast lights, and we have running lights. And going this way, where we're going now, up here on top, you have a green light. Over there in that corner, you have a red light. Then we have a switch right here that we can flip. And then you have your red light over here and your green light on the other corner. So we still have the running lights proper. The main difference of running daytime and nighttime is looking for articles in the water. You don't want to run over a rope. You don't want to hit a big board or a log or things of that nature. That's the only difference running day and night. Running in the heavy fog, of course, we can use the radar system and no problem. But before we had that radar system, during real heavy fog, a deckhand would stay on each landing, and they'd take a chipping hammer and they'd hit on the railing, and the pilot would go toward the sound. One night, one morning, the deckhand went to the restroom on the monument side, and he didn't hear the horn blow. He couldn't get back. So they were working on the battleship of Texas with his chipping hammers, and the pilot went toward the sound. You know where he ended up? Over here at the battleship of Texas. Same thing happened another time when they ended up on the other side over the shipyard. What ship was the first airplane took off from in the history of aviation? This one right here, battleship of Texas, They built a wooden platform over these aft guns that you see, and they slingshotted that airplane off. And so it was the first
Ever?
First ever. Yeah. Most of the time you have a tugboat, they call those a harbor tows. They will bring them in and out. A lot of times they just run free the side of them and bring them in and out that way. harbor tow is pointed at the bow.
Yeah.
This one coming up behind us is squared off like a bulldog.
Yeah.
And this type here pushes barges around.
Now this little guy. Back in the 1870s, Allen Brothers wanted to make a turning basin there in Main Street, and they used it there in Alex Lane. So they brought a boat in, a paddle boat called the Laura. It's an 85-foot long boat, and they brought it in, turned it around, brought it back out. They said, see, we can bring these boats in. And the skeptic says, no, that's a little boat. So what they did was they brought the Constitution in. It's 150 foot long. And they made it all the way up to Alex Landing. So they turned it around, but they couldn't turn it around. There wasn't enough room. So they had to back it up to the first big bend where they could turn it around. And they named that bend the Constitution Bend. Well, the Corps of Army Engineers back in those days wanted to make the turning basin that Constitution Bend. And of course, they're more powerful than Allen Brothers, so that's where our turning basin is now, not the Constitution Bend. Right there where they're standing is the home side of Lorenzo de Zavala. Yeah, there's that flagpole. I retired this past February. Well, October or November before that I retired. I went to my boss, Henry Jackson, and I laid it all out on line for him. I said, you let me pick my own pay scale, you let me choose my own crew, let me set my own vacation, my own holidays, my own schedule. I said, I won't retire, I'll stay and work for you. And I was supposed to retire in February. He said, well, you want to go ahead and retire today? These people that travel during the rush hour are normally construction workers or refinery workers. I know school teachers wouldn't do this, but they like to sit there in that line and nip a little bit. 4 or 5 cans of beer. Then they all get out of the car and stand out there and visit. You know, they had worked together for 8 hours. They come up here and they get out and they still got to visit with one another. With the main engines, these are Detroit 671s. The horsepower is anywhere from 170 to 180 horsepower, so they're not real strong, but it doesn't take a real strong for normal operations. You have the engine here, back here you have the transmission, then a long shaft, and on the other side of this bulkhead is what we call the dry hole. This shaft gets real hot and it takes on water to cool it, and it drops it down in this hole. So we have to pump it out about twice every 8-hour shift. Once at the beginning, once at the end of the shift. And in order to run this, we have to have electrical power and air. Here's a Detroit 271. And this portion up in here is the generator, this front part. Creates all the electrical for the lights and the radios and radar and things of that nature. And
back in here, this little cage is the air compressor. It creates the air that goes into the air tank. About 220 pounds of air pressure.
The actual bottom.
That's the bottom of the boat, right there, you're standing on. You have your day tanks over here. You have two up behind this wall. For this engine, for this power plant. Over in the other corner for the other engine and the other power plant. I'm going to crank up one engine just to show you the noise that
Well, they sound like they run smoothly, don't they?
you get to be 31, 32 years old like I am, it puts wear and tear on the eardrums. This is the engine room. Okay. Basically, man is lazy. And the first way that they got this boat across that water was, of course, they had it tied off on each side, over on each bank. They have a long pole, and if y'all don't want to get close enough to me to see, I'll pass my cap around, and it shows a man on there with a pole. He'll walk to the front of this boat, he stick that pole down in the mud, and walk backwards, and that would push the boat across. Well, this is not a work, and that pole is awkward to handle. And you got to put everything you got into that pole to push it across. So man is basically lazy. So what he done was he got him a board, but this board had a hole in the end of it, and it was dangling on this rope. We got ready to go across and pick up the board, slide it all the way up to the end of the ferry. We'll pick it up and we'll pull back on it and crimp it. Then we'll walk backwards. And that was much easier than poling that ferry across. Man is still lazy, so he's looking for an easier way to do it, so he gets him a horse and puts on it. About 3 months ago, a friend of mine gave me a drawing and said this is the way they got the Lynchburg Ferry across. And it didn't look feasible to me, the way that horse did it. But they used a horse. And in 1913, the year that they put up the first red light in Missouri, or in the United States, it happened over in Missouri, and the year that they commissioned the battleship of Texas, they put the first motor in a ferry. Another historical fact, they put it in here, in Lynchburg. They still had to tie a rope at each end so they could guide it across, because this motor that they used was not powerful enough to fight the current, the wind, the runoffs through big rains. And when the rope broke, even though they had a motor on the boat, it would drift right on down to Goose Creek and out to the bay. How many of you have heard about Jimmy Carroll? Jimmy Carroll was 94 years old when he passed away about a year ago. And when he came to Baytown in around 1917, 1918, he came out of Houston and he crossed the Lynchburg Ferry. He's heading down to Goose Creek because they're putting together a new oil field down there, a new oil company called Humboldt. And that rope broke when he was crossing the ferry. And it drifted right on out into the bay, where here come a tugboat, hooked onto it, brought him on back. And whenever he got off the boat, went down to the Humboldt Oil Refinery Company, they hired him and took him down to the docks, first place he went. He said, I could have jumped off and got here sooner, you know.